My name's Megan, and in 2016, I was given a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. I want to make this clear from the start that I am not a mental health professional. I am approaching this video from the perspective of somebody with lived experience, and I'm speaking about it from that perspective alone. My main reason for making this video is that I've seen a lot of posts floating around on the internet recently talking about BPD or talking about interactions that people have had with people who have BPD, and I think a lot of them get things really wrong. And I like to think that the main reason for that is that there isn't much education out there about what BPD is, where it comes from, what the symptoms are, how best to help someone who has BPD. So I want to try and provide some of that. And I also want to offer compassion and understanding and support, if people would like it, to other people who have BPD, because I know how isolating an experience it can be. I know how difficult it can be to live with. I know some of the obstacles that it can throw into your path. Obviously, I don't know all of them, but I would very much like to use the lived experience that I have for good and to try and do something positive with it. It can also be really difficult to access proven treatment for BPD that's actually been shown to work in peer-reviewed studies and all of that. There are very few personality disorder units in the UK. There are very few therapy programs that address BPD in the UK, and I am lucky enough to be in one of the few programs that do exist at the moment. So anything I can share online that I learn from that, I definitely want to. Because before I got into the program, I was on a waiting list for over 2 years, and I know how hard it is to try and manage symptoms and try and improve and stop it having such an impact on your life without that treatment. So in this video, I'm speaking to people with BPD, I'm speaking to people who know someone who's got BPD, and I'm also speaking to people who've never heard of it before, because that's completely fine. There's more information out there than there used to be about it, but it's not everywhere, and it's something that if you've got no reason to look into it, you might well never have come across it before. So the first thing I want to do is try and explain BPD a little bit. And I'm not going to be able to cover everything in one video. And I'm also not a mental health professional. I'm just someone with lived experience who's also done some research. So I'm sharing what I know. But if you know that anything I say is wrong, please correct me. Or if you want to have more of a conversation about something, or you want me to go into more detail about it in another video, definitely let me know. The first useful thing to know is that over 70% of people who have BPD have experienced trauma. This is the most common statistic, but it's also highly likely that the number is actually higher than 70%, because not everyone is comfortable with reporting trauma. The key thing about this, though, is that BPD is intrinsically linked to trauma. There's been a lot of talk over recent years about potentially changing the name of the diagnosis to something more related to trauma, or kind of no longer diagnosing BPD and diagnosing complex PTSD instead. What that means is that the vast majority of our behaviours that might be unhelpful coping mechanisms or might be driven by fear and more challenging to deal with in interpersonal relationships are survival mechanisms and coping mechanisms that we developed whilst or shortly after experiencing trauma. That's not to excuse the effect that some of our behaviours, or I'll just speak for myself, that's not to excuse the effect that some of my previous behaviours have had on people, but it does offer some explanation, and it also offers me a lot of hope that I can change these behaviours, I can relearn more effective, more well-adapted coping mechanisms, and I can relearn how to interact with people without as much fear behind it. A lot of studies on neuroplasticity and the ability to rewire your brain and retrain yourself to learn things have been really encouraging for me. But I also understand if that sounds really overwhelming and if that sounds like a lot to learn and a really big mountain to push a really big rock up, because I definitely felt that way at the start of therapy, and sometimes I still do. So if you're watching this video and you have BPD, I definitely understand that feeling, but it also is very much possible for things to get better for you. I don't want that to sound really patronising. certain things I'm going to say in this video are things that I wish someone had said to me at some point. So if it's helpful for you, that's great. And if it's not, let me know and I can adapt my approach in future videos. The final point I wanted to make about trauma is I absolutely appreciate that going through therapy and trying to help yourself when you have BPD can feel a lot like cleaning up a mess that somebody else made. And I definitely identify with feeling like it's really unfair that we have to relearn things and we have to adapt our behaviours due to things that we had no control over, that weren't our fault. But I do find it helpful to remember that everyone else is currently learning too. Like they're learning their entire lives, and what we're getting from therapy and what we're getting from the effort that we're putting in to learn things ourselves is almost like a fast track. You know, a lot of times I actually notice that I'm more aware of things thanks to therapy than a lot of my friends and family and people I meet are who haven't been through therapy. So while it's often a horrible thing that led us to therapy, I think there's a lot that we can learn from it that will be really, really useful for us, is essentially what I'm trying to say. There's no way of making it better that we have to go through therapy to heal from things that shouldn't have happened. But I try and take some kind of positive from it. And I also want to offer that if you ever need to rant about something, that's what this community that I'm trying to create will hopefully be for, so we can support each other when it all feels really, really crap. And actually, there is one more thing that I want to say about trauma. Reducing the stigma around BPD makes trauma a lot easier to heal from, right? Because it's easier to reach out for support. You get more compassion from other people. We're all just able to help each other better if there isn't this strange amorphous idea that pops into people's heads when they hear BPD or EUPD in the UK. And unlearning things and relearning new ways of doing things can only happen by starting to process trauma, and that's really hard to do in a society that stigmatizes you for having a particular diagnosis. It took me a really long time to receive a diagnosis of BPD, despite me showing symptoms for a really long time before that. There are weird age rules around describing personality disorders, but I think one of the main reasons why it took so long for me to get that diagnosis is because it took a really long time for me to feel comfortable and able and well supported enough in my life to talk about the trauma that I'd experienced. I can imagine a lot of other people probably have a similar experience, and if we can create spaces where people feel more supported, I feel like more people will be able to access treatment and talk about things and get the diagnosis that they need to get the treatment that they need. Because that's the main thing that I think about with diagnosis. It gave me a reason for why I felt the way I did and like an explanation. And it also opened up treatment pathways and things that I could do and learn to make my experience better and less painful. And that's kind of the positive slant of diagnosis. But in order to keep that positivity, we need to reduce the stigma. The bottom line is that people with BPD are in pain. Constant, chronic emotional pain. And that makes life really hard to deal with, to put it lightly. I think that might be the worst oversimplification I've ever come up with. But compassion helps, and understanding helps, and appreciating someone's reality is necessary for compassion. You need that empathy, and you need to be able to put yourself in someone's shoes. And that comes through an open dialogue, which can only happen if we don't immediately stigmatize people. I want to offer intellectual information and emotional honesty on this channel. I will be very open with you. But I also want to make it very clear that my experiences with BPD are mine alone, and I'm in no way trying to speak for everyone. I am in no way trying to say that everyone with BPD has the same experiences that I do. There are 256 different combinations of symptoms that you can have to receive a diagnosis of BPD. And then people feel each symptom really, really differently. So I'm offering a window into my experience, not an omniscient view of everyone's. And I really want to make sure that nobody feels like I'm trying to speak over them. So, here are some reasons why you might be wrong about BPD. Number one, if you think we're intrinsically different to other people, we're not. We're people who experience emotions very strongly. I identify a lot with the analogy that people with BPD are like emotional third-degree burns patients. Like, we have no emotional skin a lot of the time, so things that we just lightly brush against other people cause excruciating pain for us. But a lot of that comes from trauma, and a lot of that comes from upbringing, and we are exactly the same as everyone else. We're a product of our experiences. And people with BPD have often had quite adverse experiences. For a lot of us, it's an accumulation of things that build up to result in BPD. But we're not intrinsically different to you or to somebody with another diagnosis. Number two, if you think we have no capacity for empathy. This is a common misconception, and part of it, I think, is that people get confused with different personality disorders. But even with some of the other personality disorders that are commonly associated with a lack of empathy, that's a really oversimplified way of viewing things, and it's not an accurate descriptor of a lot of people's experiences with the other diagnoses either. I think it's another form of stigmatization of personality disorders in general. To speak about people with BPD, because that's the experience, or that's the personality disorder that I have experience with, we actually often have a really overdeveloped capacity for empathy. And what that does is it means that we get very overwhelmed really easily, and that can sometimes cause us to shut down and disconnect from feelings because it's too much. It's too much to handle and we don't know what to do with it, especially if we haven't been through therapy yet. So sometimes that can come across as a lack of empathy if we've had to disconnect from our feelings because we're just completely overwhelmed. We can then struggle to reconnect with our emotions. And that's one of the big things that I'm learning in therapy, is I find it too easy to connect to some emotions and really difficult to connect to others. But to say that we have no empathy for others is completely inaccurate. And the majority of people that I've come across, including myself, still keep the intellectual ability to empathize, even if we're not connecting to the emotion as deeply as we would if we weren't feeling overwhelmed. I don't know if that makes sense, but it means that we're theoretically able to put ourselves into people's shoes, even if we're not connecting to the feeling. So there's definitely not a lack of empathy involved with BPD. Number three, the third reason you might be wrong about BPD, is if you think we're manipulative. Now, this is a tricky one, because I'm going to be completely honest. I have definitely tried to get people to say or do certain things that I know would make me feel better. Like, I've tried to, in a roundabout way, get someone to give me a hug so that it kind of feels like they've spontaneously done it, because that might be the only way that I can accept it or feel like they wanted to hug me. But there's never, for me, been any malicious intent behind it. And I think that's a very rare occurrence. I think a lot of the behavior that people think is manipulative from people with BPD is us trying to get our needs met and not knowing or not being comfortable with directly asking for our needs to be met. Because remember what I was saying about growing up in a certain way? The way that's often described is growing up in an invalidating environment, which means that our needs were invalidated and we were taught that our needs didn't matter or weren't real or weren't worthy of fulfillment. So a lot of us, myself included, find it really difficult to directly ask someone, say, for reassurance or for a hug or to do us a favor, because we don't feel like we're worth that person doing it. So the only way it feels good for us to have that need met is if someone does it spontaneously. But because I know people aren't mind readers, sometimes I'll try and lead people to it, and that can come across as very manipulative. That's something that I'm actively working on in therapy at the moment. It's literally at the top of my therapy goals. But I think the main thing I want to get across is that people with BPD are not inherently maliciously manipulative. If we are at all manipulative, it's us trying to get our needs met because we haven't learned how to directly ask for things yet. Really, my final point on this one is just that a lot of us with BPD haven't had a healthy model of a relationship to kind of base our worldview on. So we haven't seen people modeling the best way to ask for their needs to be met and then getting those needs met. So we sort of don't have a marker for how to do things, and we don't have an image of how it will go if we ask directly for our needs to be met. So it's a really scary leap to take to start with. And I didn't realise quite how scary it was until I started directly working on this particular issue that I have head on. One final thing on this point is I want to mention that if you're someone who knows someone with BPD, say like a friend or a family member or a spouse or a child, or just if there's someone in your life who you regularly interact with who has BPD, and you find that they are often asking you for reassurance, or you feel like they're doing this thing of trying to lead you to doing something rather than directly asking for it, I can definitely appreciate that it's frustrating for you. And especially if someone's doing it a lot, it can leave you feeling like you're disbelieved or like your intentions aren't being trusted. And I've heard this from other people in my life, and I think that is a really, really difficult thing to deal with, and your feelings about it are definitely valid. I think the main thing that I would encourage you to remember is just what I said about things not being maliciously intended. Talking directly to your friend or family member about it, if they're in a place to hear it, can be really helpful, as can you talking to a therapist or you both going to a therapist, because there are definitely ways to make sure that you're both feeling supported and valued in your relationship in whatever capacity that is. And there are definitely going to be ways for you to work on improving communication within your relationship. That's a huge part of what I work on in therapy, and it's definitely something that's possible. So the fourth and final thing that you might be mistaken about in relation to BPD is thinking that people with BPD don't want to get better. I think I could do a whole video on this, and if that's something that you'd be interested in seeing, definitely let me know. But the short answer to this is that we do want to get better, and we can get better. We want the pain to stop. We want to be able to live healthy, happy, successful lives. Whatever that looks like to each individual, it's going to be different, but everyone that I've come across with BPD wants to feel better. And I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, people with BPD are attention seeking. They want to keep the illness because it gets them attention. And that's a complete sort of twisting of the reality. People with BPD can do things to get attention. I have definitely done that. The reason that we want the attention, though, is often misunderstood. We want the attention because the attention that we're going to get from these actions often comes in the form of somebody caring for us. And in that moment, we're desperate and we want someone to care for us. That is the need that we're trying to get fulfilled in that moment. So yes, sometimes we will do things that are seeking attention, but it's because we need it. It's because we need someone to come in and show us that we matter, because right then we don't feel like we do. It's another one of those things where it's not maliciously intended. It's not that we're trying to make ourselves the center of attention. It's that we're trying to get proof and reassurance from somebody that people do care about us. And a lot of the time, that's one of the things that my brain is most cruel about, really, is that it makes me feel like I don't matter. It makes me feel like nobody cares about me. It makes me feel like it doesn't matter if I'm here or not. I'm worthless. I'm not going to have any impact on the world. I could do an entire video on what my brain tells me, but I feel like that would be giving it what it wants, and I'm not about to do that. My main point is just those attention-seeking behaviours are us trying to feel better. So of course we want to get better in the long run. We want the pain to stop, is the line I'm going to keep repeating, because I think that will give you the best understanding of what living with BPD is like and of how to support someone with BPD. So I hope that this video has given you some insight and potentially a perspective that you've not heard before about BPD. The media and online forums often don't get things right about people with BPD, and I decided that if I have the ability to put my experience with it out there and show people what it's like for me, that's a grain of truth that I'm adding into the vast desert of the internet. I choose to believe that a lot of the viewpoints and a lot of the anger out there that is expressed online about people with BPD comes from a place of just not understanding and finding us completely bewildering and all of this kind of thing. Because that's easier for me to process than the alternative, which is that some people are just really mean. I don't like that reality. So first, I'm gonna try the information route. And if putting my story out on the internet and my experiences helps anyone understand somebody else better or helps anyone feel less alone with this diagnosis and the struggles that it can bring, then I'm glad I put it on the internet. We're not monsters, but living with this illness can feel monstrous. I can be difficult and frustrating to be around, but so can everyone. So, if you don't know someone with BPD in everyday life, now you do know someone. You know me. And if you do have BPD or EUPD, whichever diagnosis you prefer, I hope you feel like you've gained a friend, because that's definitely what I'd like this online community that I'm trying to build to be. And whether you have previous experience with BPD or you don't, I'm here to answer any questions that you have. I have a lot of video ideas of things that I think would be useful for me to talk about, but if there's anything in particular that you want to know or you want to hear my thoughts on, definitely let me know, either in the comments below, or you can always contact me on Twitter or Instagram. I'll put them here and also in the description box below. So let me know if you do have any requests. I hope you found this video helpful and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye.